On November 18th, 1995, Itzhak Perlman, the violinist, came on stage to give a concert at Avery Fisher Hall at Lincoln Center in New York City. If you have ever been to a Perlman concert, you know that getting on stage is no small achievement for him. He was stricken with polio as a child, and so he has braces on both legs and walks with the aid of 2 crutches. To see him walk across the stage one step at a time, painfully and slowly, is an awesome sight. He walks painfully yet majestically until he reaches his chair. Then he sits down slowly, puts the crutches on the floor, undoes the clasps on his legs, tucks one foot back and extends the other foot forward. Then he bends down and picks up the violin, puts it under his chin, nods to the conductor, and proceeds to play. By now, the audience is used to this ritual. They sit quietly while he makes his way across the stage to his chair. They remain reverently silent while he undoes the clasps on his legs. They wait until he is ready to play. But this time something went wrong. Just as he finished the first few bars, one of the strings on his violin broke. You could hear it snap. It went off like gunfire across the room. There was no mistaking what that sound meant. There was no mistaking what he had to do. We figured that he would have to get up, put on the clasps again, pick up the crutches, and limp his way off the stage. To either find another violin or else find another string for this one. But he didn't. Instead, he waited a moment, closed his eyes, and then signaled the conductor to begin again. The orchestra began, and he played from where he had left off. And he played with such passion and such power and such purity as they had never heard before. Of course, anyone knows that it is impossible to play a symphonic work with just 3 strings. I know that, and you know that, but that night, Itzhak Perlman refused to know that. You could see him modulating, changing, and recomposing the piece in his head. At one point, it sounded like he was detuning the strings to get new sounds from them that had never been made before. When he finished, there was an awesome silence in the room. And then people rose and cheered. There was an extraordinary outburst of applause from every corner of the auditorium. We were all on our feet, screaming and cheering, doing everything we could to show how much we appreciated what he had done. He smiled, wiped the sweat from his brow, raised his bow to quiet us, and then he said, not boastfully, but in a quiet, pensive, reverent tone, "You know, sometimes it is the artist's task to find out how much music you can still make with what you have left." What a powerful line that is. You know, sometimes it is the artist's task to find out how much music you can still make with what you have left. And who knows, perhaps that is the definition of life, not just for artists, but for all of us. Here's a man who has prepared all his life to make music on a violin of 4 strings, who, all of a sudden, in the middle of a concert, finds himself with only 3 strings. So he makes music with 3 strings, and the music he made that night with just 3 strings was more beautiful, more sacred, more memorable than any that he had ever made before when he had 4 strings. So perhaps our task in this shaky, fast-changing, bewildering world in which we live is to make music, at first with all that we have, and then, when that is no longer possible, to make music with what we have left. And something is beginning to shift, very subtly, but it's beginning to shift. A new story is starting to emerge. Now, this is very important because this is the part of the awakening. It is always an awakening, not simply within oneself. It is an awakening to a new story. I mean, we have to ask ourselves here, what does this awakening to a new story in the early years of the millennium? How does it differ from awakening in the past? For one thing, as I say, it means awakening to a new story that plants firmly within the cosmos. Without story, a culture or a civilization or even an entire era falls apart. I could give you 100 instances of how and where this has happened when cultures lost their story, when civilizations lost their story. Of course, what Toynbee does in his study of his history is he delineates 23 or 26 different civilizations and how they lost their story. He gives us a biological model, a botanical model, and then shows periods of leafing, growing, and then, of course, decline, the winter. I believe that because of the radical historical conditions in which we live, a key to awakening is recognizing oneself as part of the new story. At some level, millions of people understand this. According to my friend Pei Ray, it may be 24% of the North American population which calls itself the integral culture which recognizes this. And that is why millions and millions and millions of people all over the world seek everywhere for the new story, wondering, is it the economic freedom? Is it the new science? Is it the internet? Is it in books? Is it in conferences, seminars, and mystery schools? Justice. And yet you find that whenever you try to find the new story in one thing, something else emerges. What I'm convinced of, however, is that what is to become the new story is already more than half formed within each one of us. I feel this because of the changes that have taken place in my and in our perceptions during the course of our lifetimes. And if indeed we are the people of the parentheses, or the bridge people between the old story and the new story, then it is entirely appropriate and to be expected that we hold within ourselves, from our own life experience, the shift from one story to the other. Now I am thinking about the changes in yours and my understandings in so many areas of life. The understanding could be what we were given as our understanding about how do you bear children, how do you educate, how do you die. I mean, so many of the great issues and how they have actually moved to what we believe now. It involves a stupendous awareness of the relationship of macro history to micro history, of our true embeddedness as part of the cosmic story, of how we are cosmistics. Therein lies the true calling of the new story. In fact, given sufficient passion within ourselves for it, we really can become people who can help restory the world.